Hello, welcome to this series and this video. My name is Terry Lee Shield. I am host at Love School and here over on the YouTube channel. This is video one of a brand new series all about understanding addiction. I'm going to dive into addiction from a brand new perspective, or a culmination maybe of different perspectives that might just change how you think about addiction, how you address addiction, and then how you might prepare for recovery from addiction. This video is going to be part of a series. The series is going to be available here on YouTube. Make sure you like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and you'll be notified when the next following videos come out. It'll be one released every week over the next few weeks. If you find this once the videos have already been completed, you'll be able to access this series on a dedicated playlist that will all be linked in the description below. Here on the YouTube channel and over at Love School, we focus on all different types of recovery from trauma, abuse, and neglect, and the different ways that we might have to navigate life, because sometimes we don't always have to recover from events such as what I've mentioned. Recovery can come in all different shapes and sizes, and the reasons we might get stuck into certain behaviors, certain things that we do, can be for lots of different reasons. And one of the main things I hope that we can take, or you can take from this series, is how I learned to understand my addictions, peel back all the different layers that were driving my addictive behaviors holistically. Everything we look at Love School is like holistic. So we're looking at mind, body, our spirit, our energy, our emotions. Also looking at like environments and relationships. So the influences not only within ourselves can be complex in life in general, but when it comes to addiction, when it comes to recovery, and also those external influences, the other people, the other places, the other things that happen in our life that influence us, our choices, our behavior, and our responses. There used to be a very fixed idea of addiction, and I think that kind of lingers in our society a little bit. That original fixed idea is a bit like addiction is a defect or a choice. There's a lot of ideas about what an addict is in society, and that idea has been fed for a very long time. Like, addiction is bad, addicts are bad, they are like antisocial, drain on society, horrible things. And actually, my experience of addiction through my own recovery process, but literally spending the majority of my life surrounded by addicts in one way or another. I'm an intuitive person, and one of my skills is shadow work, which we'll cover a little bit in the video series. So I can see people's drives, behaviors, and shadows intuitively, and pick up on maybe underlying things to do that. And also, as an empathic person, get drawn in to understand more, maybe it's the emotional and deeper needs that we might have. Now, especially over, I would say, the last kind of 10, maybe 20 years, there's kind of newer, different ideas about addiction coming in. My understanding generally comes from a bit more of a spiritual, energetic, grounded, human nature-based approach, okay? I'm not really in the science gang. Doesn't really work with my energy type, my brain. It's all very clever. And you know what? I've never, ever found it helpful. Interesting, yes. Helpful, not so much. So I know that there's this whole, like, a lot of sciencey stuff now about addiction that talks about, like, brain chemicals. As you can probably tell, I'm not a huge fan of any of that, because to be honest, the way it seems to me, the way that the narrative in the science community about addiction seems to be very much that we are a slave to our brain chemicals, which actually there's all sorts of contradictory research about that it's just a theory, there's no evidence of any of that. And that we're just like, we're a product of these chemicals. And I think there's much more going on than that. Then there's like the likes of Gabor Mate, who talk a lot about trauma. And we'll cover a little bit of that in this series. That addiction is a trauma response, which I definitely found potentially part of mine. And there's other social influences and things that I've seen. So to be honest, there's a lot more in the mix now, isn't there, about addiction? My stance is this. I think addiction is a symptom. So the addiction is not the main problem. It's a surface problem. The addictions that I have, that I see other people have, are just very often, we can hide our addictions in ways, but just an outward expression of a lot of other stuff going on. So to me, addiction is a symptom. And I'll cover through these videos what is the symptom of. And also that actually addiction is natural. So to be addicted to something, to be an addict, is actually part of an innate human nature that the majority of us will experience. Now, there's always anomalies, so I'm not going to say every single person will be addicted to something, but we in our nature, which again I'll cover in other videos, are a being that seeks patterns, cycles, repetition, and being addicted to things, following certain processes, is definitely an innate part of our human nature. And bearing all that in mind, I don't see addiction so much as a problem at all, or a failing. So, as part of my whole recovery, embracing and understanding that has helped me loads. And in this particular video, I'm going to unpack a bit about my story, my background, why you might want to pay attention to this video and the following videos, and to present this insight. Addiction is a symptom. It's absolutely not a failing, and it's totally natural and is probably to be expected from most people to develop an addiction at some point or other in their lives. Boom. That's the whole series there. If you don't watch anything else, take that on, see how that resonates with you, and see if you want to watch the rest. So as I said, I'm Terry Shield, a host at Love School, and we support recovery in a natural way, natural holistic recovery with a nature-based perspective. And the reason I do that is because I have been on a recovery journey. My story is a bit complex. I'll link some kind of links in the description if you're really interested to find out a bit more about me and how I ended up doing content like this and creating the space of Love School, the origin story and stuff. But to summarize it all up, I have had traumatic experiences from an early age and learned to cope with that in very unhelpful ways, addictions being one of them, many of them. I'll cover that in a minute. And I've had I've had mental health problems linked with all that, to do with all that, because of all that. And also just learning to embrace the fact that under all of this, I would be what's considered neurodivergent. And I don't even like using that label anymore. Because do you know what I think? We're all supposed to be a bit different and unique. And how we are addicted, our addictions, are all part of that. So I come from a family of two halves, like most of us do, that have very different kind of types of addictions. One that I always seen as very obvious. So one line of my family, there was alcohol addiction, drug addiction, and very outward, obvious patterns of behavior, problems, if you like. And then another side of the family, I never really saw the addictions until a lot older. These addictions were maybe a bit more socially acceptable, maybe it's considered more normal or usual. And I didn't really notice or pay much attention to them until going through my recovery journey. Those were addictions to things like work, things like codependency, and maybe it's a bit more covert addictions, slightly different ways of coping. There was definitely still some like alcohol stuff. I'm northern. Most a lot of the culture where I grew up, there's a lot of alcohol, or there certainly was back in the like 80s and 90s when I grew up. Alcohol was like a main feature of the culture, and the way people consumed that alcohol was, like I say, maybe it's a bit varied. So whereas in like one side of the family, I saw this kind of like regular addiction, if you like, having to drink every day, sort of alcoholic. On other sides of the family, I saw like a binge drinking style of addiction that we use this to celebrate, bond, cope with difficult situations, let loose. So one was quite like a consistent addiction. The other one was quite like an explosive, we need this to do this certain thing sort of ways. So anyway, this meant that I had a very early introduction to alcohol. I also had early trauma and abuse. So alcohol was my first addiction that I developed from a very young age. I started drinking probably like 12, I think it was. And by the time I was 14, it was a bit problematic. And I had a on-off relationship with alcohol. Sometimes it was a problem, sometimes it wasn't. Until it definitely was. And I ended up giving up alcohol after being done for drink driving, actually, which I wasn't actually driving my car. I was just trying to sleep in it, but it got me banned from driving and forced to prove that I could stop drinking, which was the first time that I'd ever had to do that. And I think I was like 24, 25, something like, no, maybe it was a bit earlier, early 20s anyway. And I had to go for a certain period of time and not drink before I could get my license back, basically, which was the first time I'd actually not drank since I was like a teenager, and made me realize, oh, maybe this is a problem. Now, I did start drinking again after that. I did go back to drinking, but my relationship had shifted and changed quite a lot. I was very much more of aware of my relationship with alcohol, and ultimately gave it up after a suicide attempt, which involved alcohol, which was in my late 20s. So for a good 15 years, I had this problematic relationship with alcohol, which would swing from a consistent reliance upon it. Like I would drink most days, but also needed it to socialize, have a good time, would binge drink to the point of like real excess, make very terrible decisions when drunk, probably loads of them I can't even remember, and caused lots of ripple effect problems in my life. So that was one of my addictions. Another one, I used to smoke, so I started smoking very young as well. Cigarettes, that was. I stopped smoking cigarettes in my early 30s. So I smoked for a long time, again, probably from about like 11 or 12 to my early 30s, so 20 years or something. And I also enjoyed weed, cannabis, marijuana. I started smoking that in my late teens. So maybe it's like 15, I think I was. And pretty much smoked that every day until I gave that up, which on and off that was one of the hardest ones I had to give up, actually. And I've gone on and off it quite a few times over the years, and it's probably the most recent one I've given up, mainly because I've used it quite medicinally at times as well. So I had to kind of get over the addiction, but sometimes I would use it medicinally because I needed it for other reasons, for reducing pain and different things. And ultimately, I realized it wasn't good for me. It was bringing up all sorts of addiction demons, like I couldn't have it and not smoke it, sort of thing. So that's the most recent one that I stopped completely, just in the past kind of years. Like I say, I've had periods where I've not smoked and then picked it up for a little bit and put it down. I also have had problems with those energy drinks, caffeine, excessive drinking of it. There was a period when I was in like my peak of addiction, and I might as well chuck it in, and painkillers. So when I was in the peak of what I'll call my addiction lifestyle, I was drinking nearly much every day, smoking weed pretty much every day, drinking energy drinks pretty much every day, or Diet Coke, which is another high caffeine thing, every day, taking painkillers, and also smoking cigarettes the whole time. And I use this as a pattern, basically. So one was to kind of keep me up, to get me up, keep me working, and one was to calm me down because I had a lot of underlying stuff going on. So in the next videos, I'm going to break down how I managed to recover through all this and the insights that I gained, because there's some things that are really important that I came to understand through my recovery process. I used to always say I have an addictive personality. I used to say that all the time. So one thing that I was very conscious of, because obviously at this point, by the time I was like 15, 16, I already had several addictions. I already knew, like, oh, I can't pick up a drug and put it down. Like, there's just something. I have this addictive personality. These days, it would probably be very obviously diagnosed as ADHD or neurodivergence. But regardless, that was how at the time I explained it. And I definitely made a conscious choice at that age not to take harder drugs. I'm going to go into, I'll maybe mention a little bit about different types of addiction, like physical addictions. But like I say, a lot of what I'm looking at in this video series is not really to do with that. It's to do with the energetics of it. And another side of it, because I don't know how much it helps to believe that we're physically addicted to something. Okay, yes, I have had physical withdrawal symptoms from certain addictions, but I've also had physical withdrawal symptoms from bloody antidepressants. So, and they were way worse. So it's like, that's for me, that was a small part of it, was coping with the physical withdrawal. The behavior, the energy, the underlying healing that needed to be done was much, 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 much of a bigger issue. Most of the time, for like most addictions, even the hard stuff, you can get over the physical withdrawal within a couple of weeks. But the actual overcoming the addiction can be a whole different story. So because I had this addictive personality, I did avoid any harder stuff, if you like, which actually made it a bit harder to access recovery support. When, like, I remember times I was trying to get support and I was like, what you're addicted to? And I'm like, oh, well, I was smoking too much weed and taking Ripple every day and painkillers. And because that was like, even so after I stopped drinking, I still did those other things. And they were like, oh, that's not the sort of addictions we support with. And it's like, well, it's controlled my entire life. You know what I mean? It was actually really, really hard to get support. I have, like I say, I also had family members who've had different addictions. So I've had family members that have been addicted to cocaine, some of the more class A drugs, some of the amphetamines, crack even. And I've seen these patterns of addictions play out in different ways. I also know a lot of people who've struggled with sex addiction. I've not had much experience with something like gambling, but I have seen things like gaming addictions, shopping addictions. And the whole point that I want to get out, the reason why I'm looking in this video series is I'm not just talking about alcohol and drugs. I'm talking about the behavior of addiction, the compulsion of addiction and the energy of it, because it doesn't really matter how it manifests. It can be just as catastrophic to be an alcoholic as to be a shopping addict or a workaholic, which was one of mine, by the way. So I used to take all of these different stuff just to keep myself working, and when I wasn't working I was drinking and or smoking or whatever, you know what I mean? That was my entire life, was just constantly in one form of addiction or another. So over the next videos, I'm going to explain what I discovered to be kind of three really important truths of addiction. No matter what the addiction is, I'll go through that. Another one that was really important is understanding like the archetype, the energy archetype of what drives the individual behaviors of addiction, because there are different types of addicts, okay? And it's really important to understand the type of addict you are so that you can actually plan your recovery, because different types of addicts have all different types of habits of behavior. And I'm also going to share with you how I learned to heal. So not just to heal and recover. So not just to stop whatever the one addiction was, to really heal the pattern, the underlying drives, and recover my life so I don't actually have any addictions anymore. I'm at a stage now, and look, I'm not advocating for this. Don't jump into that because a lot of people are not going to be ready for it. Because, like I say, it's a big journey to get from there to there. I first stopped drinking, like I say, it was in my early 20s, and I'm now in my early 40s. So we're talking 20 years. Now I can have a drink. I don't drink a lot. I generally don't drink very much at all. But if I do want an odd drink, I can have it and not get caught in that cycle that I used to. I don't need it to have a good time or the celebration thing or you know how I used to use it for like fun or coping, and I don't need it as a crutch every day in my life. So I've got to a point now where I can still actually do some of the things that I gave up without being controlled by the addiction. And once I realized that, once I'd solidified that as a foundation, I kind of understood that I had this maybe insight that other people could benefit from. And that's what this entire video series is going to be about. So you might hear some things that are a bit contradictory to what you've normally heard. They might be inclusive of various different ideas you've normally heard. I've not had any formal training at all. This is me talking from my own experience, from a holistic nature, because my addiction recovery has definitely involved a big spiritual awakening and a huge shift in my connection with spirit, with a higher power, if you like, God, nature, all of that, and understanding that and integrating in my lifestyle, and also looking at how I treat my body, my mental health, my mind, and looking at other external aspects of environments and relationships that were all feeding my addictions. If this is all resonating, you think, oh my goodness, I'm a little bit interested in this. Like I say, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell because you'll be notified when the new videos are coming up. They're going to be released in a series every week. If you come across this after they've been released, they'll all be in a playlist, so you can watch them one after another. I do recommend that you watch them in order that they come out. You don't have to, you can do what you want, but I think it'll probably make more sense if you watch them like that. When we get to the end, you'll have a good understanding of addiction from the perspective that I want to share with you, and which is that addiction is a symptom. It's natural, and it's the addiction itself is not the problem. Okay. We're going to unpack all of that in this series. And at the end, I'm going to give you some next steps if you decide that you actually do already and would like to benefit from a recovery journey. I'm going to give you some next steps as well. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there for this video. Thank you so much for joining me. Let me know in the comments what you think, anything you're interested to find out more about. I'll link up any helpful resources in the description, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for joining us. Bye.